Okay, it looks like we're in a little bit smaller group today, and so I appreciate everybody that's on, and hopefully you're having a good week this week and going into preparations for Thanksgiving next week and the holiday season after. As always, this is an opportunity for you to share with each other, ask questions of your peers. If you're dealing with something at your district, to wondering how you're dealing with things. Clearly, you've just came through an election, and so you might have questions for Brad about transition issues, things along those lines that you're puzzled about. So feel free to either raise a hand, throw something in chat, and we'll make sure we address that. I've got a few issues that I want to touch on and maybe get some feedback on. One is onboarding process. So I just mentioned elections. If you've had or expecting turnover on your board due to the elections, I would strongly encourage, and it seems like I'm surprised every year when I'm in conversation with school districts, whether it be superintendents or board members, where they really don't have an existing onboarding process for new board members coming onto the board. And I've talked to enough boards and enough superintendents to know how invaluable they can be. And so, and I know that Debbie Stair on our staff, talks to districts, helps lay out what might an onboarding process might look like. I would ask anybody here that has what they think is a quality onboarding process that would like to share. Throw up your hand or turn on your mic and do that. What I've told districts this year that I was talking to one last week, I would bring in the people that have the school board elect members as soon as you can, not wait until January. They should have them in December. You should plan on meetings with the board president and superintendent together. So they see the two positions as kind of a unified front working together. It's up to each district what is included in that onboarding, but definitely policies of the board, where they can find them, that kind of information, procedures, culture of the board, culture of the school district, communication kind of norms within the community, or not within the community, within the board, um, conversations about um, school finances. Some districts definitely have more than one meeting where they might introduce new board members to, like the business manager, the CFO might introduce them to principals. All of those, like all of the things that you can think of from a school board perspective that would be worth knowing for somebody new. Um, Putting some kind of onboarding process in place if you don't have one would is really does a lot, and that can deal with board members that you think are just going to be fine. And I think it's also important if you do it because you have a board member that you think is running on a single issue or wants to be disruptive. Your goal is still to try to reach out with an olive branch, give them the lay of the land of how things have worked in your situation. I was presenting to a group of superintendents a few weeks ago. One of them mentioned I didn't even solicit and said, they try to get every new board member into CBA 101 as quickly as they can to give them a foundation for what would they need to know. Others turn to a workshop and do a roles and responsibility workshop for the whole board and superintendent in January or February. We've also heard of districts like 101, we can offer it as a workshop in the district. So it might mean you as a board member go through it twice because you've done it once before, but it's a good way to learn together. If you have a new superintendent, it's also a great way for them to learn what that initial class is like. I've talked to a lot of superintendents that actually almost every 2 years when they have board turnover, they take 101 with that new board member, which I think is really a tremendous way to do things because that means they're spending time with them in person. They get to talk about what was discussed over a 6 hour class. I think for a soup that's willing to do that, that's another good way to build relationship and develop things. So, but I want to ask, and I'm going to pause and say, any boards out there that you think you have a really good onboarding process and you'd like to share with others what that looks like? I might be the only person talking today. I'm gonna have to switch to Brad and Jen at some point just to not put everybody to sleep. That's all I'll mention on onboarding if there's not any questions, but make sure that you're going through that in your district. And if you're talking to other districts because you're in a MASB meeting in November, make sure you're sharing that same information that they really should be considering that. Um, Another item, I'm hoping all of you know, and we can do this with the virtual hand. So MASB Board of Directors decided to offer, in recognition of our 75th anniversary, a $750 rebate for uh, almost all, but not all, workshops and trainings and conferences that a school district would be able to get a $750 rebate. I want to know from a show of hands, how many of you are aware that we were doing that? Okay, I'm seeing actually a decent number that have not. Um, so we've sent out emails to, and Larissa can correct me if I'm wrong, but I know that I believe that we've sent out emails to every board member in the state on this. I know we mentioned it at conference, but not everybody goes to conference. Um, and the way we've done it is we've created an online application, and all that is to signify that you're interested. And there's a list of, workshops and other things that you can use the money for. At the end of the year, we will rebate up to $750 to recognize our 75th anniversary um, to any district that has filled out that application. Now, if you do a workshop and you don't do the application, there's not going to be a rebate sent, partly because, and Larissa put the link in the chat so you can use that. And part of the reason that we're not giving a rebate to anybody that takes a workshop is because there are certain districts that have already told us, we appreciate the effort from MASB, but our workshop's $825, and as a board, we're comfortable paying that. MASB can keep their money and use it for services. And so that's fine with us. Our board really came to this conclusion as just an idea of saying thank you to boards and districts that want to use our services. Of course, we also were interested in trying to take those boards that maybe haven't been as engaged with us or maybe are having financial difficulties and try to make it a little bit easier for them to do so. So as I said, with an $825 workshop and a $750 rebate, you're not going to have to expend a lot of money. Amy, your question, does the workshop happen to happen this year? So it needs to happen by June 30th. It's a fiscal year for us. So by the end of your school year. So we've got another 7 months yet for people to do workshops. And we do have to have a hard stop, and Larissa just put that in there, that it has to be actually completed by June 30th of 2025, because otherwise we're in a new budget year. And for us, from an accounting perspective, it becomes really difficult. So it's more of a lifting it up to make you aware of it again for those that weren't aware. And clearly there was a number that did not. And, sometimes if you're an active member of MASB and you mention a workshop to your rest of your board that maybe isn't as involved, they're saying, oh, we don't want to spend the money. Well, this is another way for us to be able to say, hey, this is going to be nearly free for you. We did not include our CBA classes in this because they're reimbursable under Michigan Department of Education. So we didn't want to have that. We didn't want to put money into a place that was already getting reimbursed. But you could definitely, soup eval training also was something that was reimbursable by MDE. And so this is really a lot of our workshops, conferences, institutes, things along those lines. And it says it on the application. If you click, you'll see everything that's eligible for. And I really encourage you to think about it. And on the flip side, if you're a district that is active with us and often does a workshop every year, and you're like, you know what, we're not interested in the $750, you can keep it. Don't fill out the application and we're going to be good to go. But it will be done as a rebate when we close the fiscal year and get that sent back to districts. just as a way to say thanks and give back. So wanted to let you know, if you have any questions, throw them in the chat or throw up your hand. Happy to try to answer those questions. And the last thing that I will mention, that got a little buzz during conference, is our Spring Institute, that is coming up in the first weekend in May. And you can't register for it or anything like that at this time, but I wanted to bring up the awareness of this, is that our Spring Institute is going to be on Mackinac Island this year. That was a place that we used to do a summer conference every year. That became cost prohibitive for districts to afford summer rates on Mackinac Island. We were able to negotiate with the hotel property at Mission Point, and Larissa's staying on top of things. We've just got the link to give you about Spring Institute, with registration hopefully open by the end of the week. So we were able to negotiate a good rate with Mission Point. Granted, I will tell you that Mackinac Island on the first weekend of May, we could have temperatures in the 70s. We could have temperatures in the 40s or 30s. So it's going to be prepared for the weather, but I'm sorry, lost my train of thought. It's been a demand from our members to go back to the island. It was enjoyed by many. This was our way to try to go back to the island and also provide opportunity for learning at a reasonable rate that wasn't prohibitive for people to attend. We're really going to push it. We want to get as many people as possible to that Spring Institute, because our costs for certain things, like everybody on the island, is higher. We need the registrations to make sure that we can make it a good experience for everybody and possibly bring it back there if we are successful. So I see that, let's see, Nathan, random, but the shuttles will be running again, right? I didn't know that they've been down. What, maybe you can share what that experience is.
I'm kind of sick, so I'm not able to get through the whole thing, but I thought they stopped like in October or November and didn't start again until like June.
Oh, no, yes. So this is the either first or second weekend that the island is open. And so, nope, we're not. Yeah, this is right after the island reopens. So boats will be going back and forth, and all of the carriages will run back and forth to the hotels. So nope, we'll be good in that regard. So no problems with that. Valerie, I appreciate it. Was enjoyable at Mackinac. Absolutely. Clearly, you've been on the board a while, if you can remember that experience. So anyways, just wanted to bring that up to you as well. I would say, any questions on election things? Brad, I might have Brad talk about his, what he's hearing from people or questions that he's hearing. And I see also that Brad, he sent me a message. Brad, if you want to touch on FLSA, happy to let you do that.
Sure, thanks, Don. So if you were part of any of my legal updates within the last, say, 8 to 10 months, you might have heard me talking about a change in the rules or the regulations for implementing the Fair Labor Standards Act. And this is a federal law that guarantees a federal minimum wage, but probably more significantly, it requires overtime for non-exempt employees that work more than 40 hours a week. So if you're a non-exempt employee, such as a cafeteria or custodial worker, bus driver, if you work over 40 hours under this law, you're required to be paid overtime. But you can be exempt from this law, and many education professionals are exempt from this law. And there's a broad exemption that covers teachers. So regardless of how much money or salary a teacher makes, they are considered to be exempt, so they will not receive overtime under this law. But if there are other education professionals, one that comes to mind, your athletic director, who doesn't fit within that broad exemption and must fit within another exemption to the law that requires a minimum salary threshold. And in order to be exempt, you have to have administrative responsibilities, and then also you make more than what this salary threshold is. So previously, I should say as of now, but previously, it was $35,568. And that was increased July 1 up to about $42,000. And then it was even going to increase further in January in the neighborhood of $50,000. So if you had an athletic director who was making less than that, under this law, you're going to be required to elevate their salary. This was pursuant to these new regulations that were being passed to implement FLSA. Well, on Friday, a district court judge ruled that these regulations exceed the scope of the authority that the Department of Labor has in implementing the regulations. So now the salary threshold is reverting back to the original amount of $33,000. So if you hear your administration talking about this issue and struggling with, all right, we already increased this person's salary to comply with what we thought was going to be the salary threshold, and now it's reverting back, you're kind of stuck with that salary. I suppose you could go back and readjust the salary, but I'm not sure what type of message that would send to the employee. But obviously, this decision is going to create a little bit of consternation and confusion in school districts that had non-exempt employees who were under the salary threshold, and then were going to be increased. Their salary was going to be increased so they could continue to be exempt from the overtime requirements. So I just wanted to give everybody a heads up on that. This decision was this issued on Friday, and we're probably going to see more of this going forward. We already saw it with Title IX, where we had courts interpreting the new Title IX regulations and determining that they could not be enforced in certain states and in certain schools, and ruling that the Office of Civil Rights went beyond their legal authority in implementing. Now you have another district court that has issued an opinion saying the Department of Labor exceeded its scope of authority, and it's all generally based upon the U.S. Supreme Court eliminating the Chevron doctrine, which gave discretion to these executive agencies to implement these regulations and deference to the agencies as well. So courts are no longer deferring to these agencies, and you're going to see just judicial decisions throughout the country that will be interpreting federal laws, and it may vary from jurisdiction to jurisdiction how courts interpret these federal laws.
Brad, I'll ask a follow-up on that. So one of the things, because of the way that courts are now like laying into this in the past, like I think about, you mentioned Title IX. I think about President Obama had Title IX regulations that were then changed under President Trump, that were then changed under President Biden. And I would expect again that President Trump will try to make those changes again. And in the past, like through that process, right, as you said, there's been more deference paid to that rulemaking authority to each of the presidential offices. So in this case, anticipating Title IX, where we've just, in the last 6 months kind of gotten the guidance, I'm probably not wrong in thinking that President Trump will end up having new guidance. But even with that, the courts are going to be able to individually interpret, even as he tries to, do something different than what President, like, is that accurate?
Yeah, that's a fair assessment. And it's gonna, when you look at the Title IX statute, it is very brief. So there's not much there for courts to work with in terms of what constitutes discrimination on the basis of sex. And now the big issue is what does sex mean? Does it mean biological gender, or does it mean identifiable gender, sexual orientation? And that's where courts are kind of all over the map on that particular issue. And eventually, those issues are going to have to go to the Supreme Court, and then the Supreme Court will give us ultimate guidance that will be binding.
All right. I do see a follow-up on besides the athletic director, what other employees might not be exempt from overtime, like might earn overtime monies?
It would be other director positions, possibly a director of transportation position if that person is currently exempt due to having an administrative position, director of facilities, those director positions that don't fit within the educational exception that applies to teachers and principals and other folks involved in the education of students. So it would predominantly be those folks.
Food service, business office.
Yeah. Yeah, a business manager would be another good example. Now, I'm assuming most business managers probably make over that
Yeah.
salary threshold, but depending upon the size of the district, who knows?
I'm just reading through, make sure. Brad, I said it at the top of the show. I know you've been getting a lot of calls on transition related to elections. What are the types of things that people are dealing with that might be, even that folks on here might not be thinking about that they need to address?
So one question that's come up frequently the last couple of weeks is the situation where you may have board members who are not up for election and say their term expires in 26 or 28, but they're considering resigning from the board. And then maybe you had a current board member, an incumbent, who was running for reelection but did not get elected. So the situation becomes if this board member who's considering resigning resigns during the kind of lame ducks period with the school board, so it resigns, let's say in December, could that current board member whose term is expiring December 31st and will not be serving on the board January 1, could that current board member apply and be eligible for a vacancy created by the board members whose term doesn't expire until 26 or 28? And the answer to that question is yes. The board member should not be a part of the discussions or the vote for filling that vacancy. Once they make their interest known that they're interested in filing for that or submitting their application for that vacancy, they should recuse themselves from the entire process. Although another way to do it is they could resign from the board at that point when they submit their interest in that vacancy. Then you'd have two vacancies, and then the voting threshold actually goes down to 3 rather than being at 4 because you have two vacancies at that point, and it'd just be a 3-2 vote to appoint that person to the vacancy. If they remained on the board while they were applying for that vacancy, then it would still have to be at least a 4-1 or 4-2 vote to fill the vacancy. So that one has come up. Other questions relating to conflicts of interest with new board members coming on board. A common one is, what about a board member who doesn't directly work for the school district, but works for the school district as a third-party employee? And MASB has consistently found or advised that that's still a conflict of interest. There's a older Attorney General letter that I have that addressed that issue from the perspective of a substitute teacher. A teacher who retired, got elected to the board, and still wanted to substitute teach in the school district through a third-party contractor. The Attorney General in its letter indicated that's still a conflict of interest, falling under the incompatible office law, preventing that person from serving on the board and subbing as a third-party contractor. So I interpret that letter to apply to any third-party position, whether it's a custodial position, cafeteria, even an educational support position. cannot serve on the board and serve in one of those positions through a third-party contractor.
Follow-up question, Brad. It says, does the appointment have to go through a public board meeting?
Yes, the appointment would have to go through a public board meeting. So with any appointment, you follow your bylaws. The law is very brief on what you're required to do to fill a vacancy. If you have, less than a majority of the board vacant, so obviously with one vacancy, that's less than a majority, the law says the board may fill that vacancy by appointment. If it's not filled within 30 days, then your ISD board fills the vacancy. But that is the one requirement. And the other requirement is that the appointment must be done at a meeting held in compliance with the Open Meetings Act. So whether you post the position, whether you conduct interviews, all that is going to be determined by your board bylaw. So yeah, if some bylaws are pretty open-ended and broad, which may not require a posting, may not require interviews. So in the example I provided earlier, Don, the board could just simply appoint that current board member who has an interest of serving on the board until, to fill that current vacancy.
So Brad, when I think about like challenges to process, let's say you have a district that does not have much in their bylaws. So it does not spell out how they go about appointments. They have a situation where, just like the one you laid out with a board member who got defeated and there's going to be a vacancy. But even though they didn't have anything in bylaws or policy, their practice over the years has been to post it and to do interviews. What would your recommendation be? Should they stick with the process they've always used, or because they don't have it in bylaws, they could make the change for that purpose and be like, hey, we knew this person, they served on the board, we decided to just do an appointment because of that?
So from a pure legal perspective, I would tell them they're well within their rights under law to not follow their past practice and just appoint that person without posting and conducting interviews. Now, from a PR and a political perspective, I would encourage them to consider following their past practice, or at least recognize at a meeting that because of the unique circumstances, we are deciding not to follow the past practice of posting the position and interviewing. Where it may even become more of a sensitive issue is, let's say that incumbent, wasn't even the runner-up who wasn't elected to the board. You may have someone that finished ahead of the incumbent that wasn't elected, but they're still going to appoint the incumbent. And obviously you could get pushback from your community. It's like, well, you're not following the will of the community. This person had more votes than the incumbent, but you're still appointing the incumbent. And, that's a political communication issue, and the board has legal authority to do that.
And you just mentioned the second vote getter. I've heard people wrongly think, oh, if I do an appointment, you have to appoint the person that got the second most votes. And that is not the case. That doesn't matter.
That is not the case. Yep.
Oh, right there. Somebody asked if anyone on this call has a solid appointment process and policy. Would you be willing to share it and offered an email address? So, and Brad, you might have something for Nathan as well that you can share directly too, but
what you're going to find, Nathan, most bylaws are very similar. I would say maybe 75% of our members are Neola policy clients, Don, and most Neola folks have the same process in their bylaws. Where you will find more detail is when those boards have adopted operating procedures. It's those operating procedures that really get into the nitty-gritty of the process and provide the specific guidance. So that's what you're going to want to look at, Nathan. Those districts that have operating procedures and track down the process that they use for filling a vacancy.
All right. Jen, we've been silent on legislative issues. Nobody's thrown anything out there. We're going to be in lame duck when they come back after Thanksgiving. Anything worth sharing or all up in the air still?
Well, lame duck is either going to be a complete mess, or it's going to be nothing. Probably nothing in between. We did do views from the Capitol yesterday, and I will put a link to that in the chat. If you missed it, you can take a look at that. But I'm happy to answer questions. It really just depends if the House Dems show up, because 56-54 means no one can be absent, because the Republicans are not going to be very willing to give up votes, which is not a Republican issue. It's a minority issue. Minority parties always do that. If they're going to take over, it just normally doesn't matter as much because the margins aren't this small. So if everybody comes, it'll be nuts. If one person catches a cold, their car breaks down, they decide they want to sleep in, then we won't do anything.
All right. Other, and I could ask Brad to keep talking about election stuff, but I don't want to, like, if don't have a lot to talk about today, that's okay. I don't mind giving time back to individuals. Make your, lunch a little freer, but questions that are out there, things that you're dealing with in your district. I mean, you've got Brad and Jen on here that, have some expertise to be able to answer those questions. And you have all of you to be able to help answer questions with each other. I just want to make sure that everybody is getting the information they need. One thing another that I would mention, I was talking about workshops earlier. If you are a district that typically does do an early year workshop with new board members, I would encourage you to call as soon as you can, because I know that all of our adjuncts and Debbie are booking already out beyond January. So don't wait until January and say, hey, can we have a workshop this month? Because the answer will be no. That they will be completely filled up. So I would just encourage you so do that. I was just reading Mark posted, you were the runner-up. I think voters would want me to fill a vacancy if one occurs. Yeah, Mark, that's what Brad was really getting at there. There's no legal requirement that if there's a vacancy that the person that gets the runner-up would get appointed. Now, in your case, you are somebody that's already served on the board, so you'd be runner-up and somebody that served on the board, so that might be very well the case, but there's no legal requirement that they do that. Depending on, as Brad said, your board policy and procedures. If there was an opening and let's say your procedures, I would say be more typical, where you do a posting, you do interviews, you would go through that process, and then the board would make a decision. And some of that changes, right? If you are on a board that maybe, let's say, the majority has changed because there was that many people up, like what your board used to do and what the new board wants to do might have changed. Like they might act differently and decide to do things differently too. So I'm reading Kurt's email on new classes that he took. How do we as board members keep student achievement at the forefront of the district focus and actions? Any best practices by district? Student achievement is our primary. So that's a great question, Kurt. And if anybody has some ideas that you have done some things on student achievement and you have an answer for Kurt, throw up your hand. I'd be happy to have you share with him. Put in a chat if you would like. Clearly, the easy answer in this space, Kurt, is through your strategic plan. Like you can, if this is going to be first and foremost, and this is where the board wants to go, it really should be a goal and focus of your strategic plan. And in that, it can be laid out like what that looks like. And that could be just like any strategic plan item or goal. You may have the superintendent once every 2 months or once every month giving you an update on what they're doing in that space or how you are doing as a district in student achievement. So I do think in the space of, for many districts, having a strategic plan that would focus on that is the easiest answer. Short of the strategic plan, that has to be a question or a conversation amongst the board and the superintendent. If the board says, yes, we really think that we want to see how we're doing regularly on this, it could be something that you set as a goal within the superintendent's evaluation structure. And I would recommend that it be something formal, either in evaluation or in strategic plan, because if you set 6 goals for your superintendent and that's what he or she is being evaluated on, and then you have this other thing, other goal on student achievement, but it's not tied to evaluation, it's not a clear message to the superintendent on which one is most important. And you really want to make sure that the goals that you're evaluating on are the ones that you're having your superintendent focus on. You really run into some problems, and I hear this during evaluation time, where a superintendent's, at the evaluation and the board's like, you didn't do X, Y, and Z. And the response is they were not in the agreed upon goals or rubric that we selected. And I don't blame the superintendent at that point questioning how new goals are put out there without being in the evaluation. So I think it has to be a goal in their evaluation or in a strategic plan. That would be the best way to carry it forward, to make sure that there's accountability. And there's got to be conversations within the board, because sometimes the board says, you may get board members that will say, student achievement, the focus of student achievement rests with our superintendent and curriculum director and teachers, which is accurate. But as a board, you also really want to be kept up to date on what is going on in that sphere. And it's okay for board to have goals about, growth in student achievement or things along those lines. And so it should not be left up just to administration to monitor how you're doing on student achievement. That is a place for the board to ask questions and make sure that happens. So, and thanks for that response, Kurt. So hopefully that was helpful for both Kurt and for anybody else that's looking at student achievement. And also I'll just say glad that you appreciated those classes at the conference.
Hey, Don, one thing I wanted to mention, and maybe it's possibly we shared a link with this in one of our dashboards, but recently the Office of Educational Technology and the Office Department in the Federal Department of Education put out a great AI document. It's called Empowering Education Leaders, a Toolkit for Safe, Ethical, and Equitable AI Integration. There's been a ton of stuff out there on AI. But this is kind of like really the first document put together, by an education department. I don't believe the Michigan Department of Education has produced anything yet, but this is produced by the Federal Department of Education, has a lot of great information in it. So anyone that's looking to study up on AI, take a look at this document. Again, it's called Empowering Education Leaders, a Toolkit for Safe, Ethical, and Equitable AI Integration.
Thanks for that, Brad.
Yeah.
I will also mention, and I know that we've also shared this in dashboards that have went out. We are co-sponsoring. It's not our event. Michigan Virtual is actually sponsoring an event in December on AI. School board members are invited, as are teachers, administrators, and anybody else. Michigan Virtual, this is really their space, their expertise. They did a clinic session related to AI at conference. Like I would encourage for districts to think and consider. This is going to be a big conference. I think they have capacity to do well over 1,000 people. And Larissa posted the link for Michigan Virtual's AI Summit. This is a tough place for boards, right? Like it is moving so quickly. And you want to make sure, so many people still defer like this idea. They think of ChatGPT and they think about student cheating and they want to address that. And AI is so much bigger than that already. There are tremendous tools that can help your teachers teach. It can make your teachers more efficient. There's tools related to administration. There are tools related to student learning. Like it is really expanding so rapidly. I think, and Neola has put out some very broad policies, which are appropriate at this point, because you don't want to be a district that's shutting down, kind of the learning opportunity that is AI. And the other thing is we're already seeing what I would call an education gap. And we're having some conversations on this where there's very few people with expertise in AI. And so you may have a staff member, it could be a teacher, it could be an administrator, but somebody with expertise that just jumps into AI and knows a lot of just knows a lot. And your school district, your superintendent has empowered that person to start helping others within the district learn and do things. And then we have other districts that nobody's done that. Like maybe it's not an interest, maybe whatever reason it has happened, like not much is happening in AI in your district. And I will tell you, like there's a distinct difference and an advantage, right? If you have somebody that understands, as Brad said, the ethical use of AI, how it can help teaching and learning, and you're as a district now moving down that path, and that means it's helping kids. And then you have this other district that's, really it's got not much going on because they just don't have the capacity or wherewithal to do it. At that point, the gap's going to start growing. And one of the things at the state level we're talking about is how do we prevent that gap from happening? Like, how do we try to make sure, and we've talked to Jamie at Michigan Virtual, like what can we do resource-wise to make sure that district that doesn't have a staff member or doesn't have capacity still has a place to turn to learn about what apps are out there, what resources are out there, what can we do as a district to help our teachers move forward with this so that we don't end up with this big split. And I know I had the curriculum director from Northville schools on my podcast a couple weeks ago. He did an article in Leaderboard in September. Or is it, I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, Lewis. Maybe it was in the December issue that we had the Leaderboard article on AI and the board and working with the school board, the director from Northville. But somebody that is already, like, he is a person that's been at the state level. He's done presentations at countless conferences. Michigan Virtual has some staff members that are going out into districts and doing presentations about opportunities. So I would encourage you to reach out to people. I'm seeing a post here from Brooke, as someone who works with generative AI as my job. It's complex, moving so quickly. Yeah, and ethical concerns. I actually had somebody that I had not brought forward at conference or after conference, a conversation about AI that was really talking, it was ethical, but not in what we normally think about from ethical, like cheating, using and work product and all of that, but really talked about the environmental impact of AI and the energy usage that comes from AI and utilization, and like how much energy is, when I'm thinking energy, like electricity, when you're actually prompting a chat GPT or some other tool to go out and get information. And like, what does that look like in the long term as AI grows and grows? Like, what does that do in the power grid space? How do we think about that in this space? And we had not thought about it. I will tell you, now I have to know which one it is, Winter Institute or Spring, I can't remember. Our focus is going to be AI in one of those two institutes as well. I believe it's Spring Institute, but I could be wrong on that. And so we're going to try to be ourselves better learners during that time. Brooke, thank you for that additional, include the workers behind the scenes that program the models and how they're treated. I mean, this is, it is, they talk about like the brave new world, and it is going to be a learning process. And I've had many people say that AI will impact the world more than the internet impacted the world, which seems pretty crazy based on how much the internet is impacted. But AI is just moving so rapidly. If we think about the number of subscribers to ChatGPT in its first year, I mean, I can see why they're saying that. It's really amazing, kind of the growth in that area. So I appreciate, Brad, you bringing that up and prompting that. Kurt, you asked a question on civil discourse. Great question. So I am meeting actually the first week of December with our partners at Grand Valley and the Padnos Center to iron out final details. I met internally with Jesse, our director of CPRM, to talk about, once that meeting wraps up, how we will market. So our anticipation at this point is in January, you will start seeing materials coming out of MASB which will be because we just don't have the internal knowledge and capacity on this. So that's why we're partnering with Grand Valley. They have been out doing community forums and community trainings on civil discourse with different entities across the state over the last like 4 years. And so in essence, it'll be a 3-hour workshop. And initially it will be for up to, I think, 12 to 15 people that could be the board and administrative staff, to have a 3-hour workshop on civil discourse, how to manage it, how to have that function both within your board, within the organization, and with your community as they come into your board meeting. If the district likes that 3-hour workshop, is interested, Grand Valley State has a second workshop that actually would bring in the community to have conversations on civil discourse and model it and try to kind of show your community how best to engage in a time where we know that it's difficult for engagement at this level. So we are partnering with them to do that. We will schedule it directly through us, just like we schedule every other workshop. And in this way, like we do with an adjunct staff member, we get the call, the district says we would like this workshop. Here's dates that are available. We will then reach out to Grand Valley, make sure that we can find a date that works. We will send them in. I will say, and we're going to finalize pricing. MASB is not setting the pricing on this. This is being set by Grand Valley. MASB is not increasing whatever their rate is. I can tell you, because it's 2 facilitators, it is going to be more expensive than what we normally charge, just because of the work that is involved in it. And we're not doing an upcharge so that MASB takes a piece of this. We just want the service to be offered to our districts. And so that was a great question, Kurt. You'll start seeing things in January, and we hope to be able to have districts interested and be able to bring Grand Valley in and work with them and come out of this with a good experience. Ultimately, our name will still be on it with theirs. And so we are going to make sure that we do, an end of workshop survey so that we're getting feedback, so that I don't have any doubt of Grand Valley, but I want to make sure that it's also up to the standards that MASB always practices in delivering of that. So just want to that's a great question, and want to let you know the answer to that. Nathan, like Mark, is someone who did not win their election but wants to remain engaged. Is there engagement with alumni board members? A great question also, Nathan. We don't really have anything for alumni board members. We do turn over every 2 years about 700 board members. So like about 20% of board members in the state turn over every election cycle. And so with that kind of numbers, it's just hard to figure out what a mechanism would look like when we also then have to serve the 4,000 that are elected. So, many of those turnovers aren't like your case. If you ran and lost, sometimes that would also include people that chose not to run and their seat was filled. But roughly 700 new board members every election cycle that we go through, and hence the reason we're in a constant kind of teaching and learning opportunity with MASB, just because we always have that kind of turnover. So, but appreciate that question. And what I would say, and we've seen this many, many times, stay engaged in your community at the board, at the board level. And just because you've lost, run again. We've got a lot of people that lost an election, run again, get reelected, and then serve on a board for a long time. So as long as that's something that you're interested in, I would encourage you to think about it that way and just stay active. Be involved in parent teacher organizations, booster groups, whatever it might be. Just a person attending board meetings, and know that there's a chance, as we've talked about, appointment is another avenue, right? If an opening occurs, or thinking about running at a later time. So, any other questions, thoughts, concerns? Larissa, thanks so much for everything you've been posting. You've been on top of things for us. Really appreciate that. Well, I'm going to say we're going to give people their 7 minutes back. I thought it was going to be longer, but you guys asked good questions and started into the conversation. So I want to say thank you, everybody, for what you do. For those board members that are either leaving your board because of election loss or because you've decided not to run again this year, I'll say thank you for your service on behalf of the state of Michigan. I'll say we appreciate that. And we appreciate good board members engaging with MASB and trying to learn what your job is. So thank you very much. I hope that you all have a wonderful holiday coming up next week, and encourage you to make sure that you reach out and ask questions, get us to come into your district and help. And just thank you all for what you're doing. And thanks, Kurt, for the comment on ALC. Dr. Brown is getting high marks from all of our members that are filling out their surveys. So that would be the other thing. If you went to conference, make sure you fill out the survey that was sent to you so that we get your feedback. Have a good day.
And priority setting surveys are coming. Make sure you fill those out too.
All right. Thanks, Jen.